Well, hi there. I'm going to show you how to do my Milesian Stitch Hat, and it's going to be a slouch hat, but if you don't want to make a slouch hat, you just make it shorter and then have a regular beanie out of it. But this is the stitch. It's a really beautiful, beautiful stitch. Milesian stitch. Easy to do. Inside looks really nice too. So you could make it reversible if you wanted to. And I did an owl-eye brim. But of course you're welcome to do another brim. And I like the owl-eye brim. You can fold it up if you want. It looks really good, or it looks good the other way too. So it's really nice that way. And I like sometimes making slouchy hats, and then I can fold the brim up to make it into a beanie or wear it with the brim down and it becomes a nice long slouchy hat. But this one I made on a custom 49 peg loom that I had Cindy Wood Looms make for me. And the reason for that is with the Milesian stitch you need an odd peg loom for it to work out evenly and perfectly, because you have to alternate the rows. You do 2 stitches together and you alternate the rows. Now if you only have an even peg loom, you could still make this. But when you come to the end, so if you were going around and you came to the end, you would have to do just probably a knit stitch and then come around from behind and in front and do another knit stitch, just so that you had more stitches on here so you wouldn't have a big hole, because you'd have to go knit this one and then start doing the next 2 pegs together to be alternating. And you would have a bit of a different stitch going up there, because see here my stitches are all the same going up, but then that could be the back of your hat. Or if you were going to use this pattern to make a cowl in the round, same thing. If you had an even loom, you would do that so that it would blend in. But if you have an odd pegged loom, then it's just perfectly seamless and you keep going around and around and around. The yarn I'm using is Premier Aura. And it says it's a number 4 yarn, but this yarn is as thick as a lot of 5s I use. So it's coming out like nice and bulky on the 5/8 inch loom. But that's it. It's just this color, the Premier Aura too, because I got it in another color and it was a number 4. So there you go. But it's a pretty shade of blues and purples and everything like that. So that's the yarn I'm using, and I have the 5/8 inch loom. So the first thing we're going to do is do an owl-eye brim. So that you can catch up to me, I'm just going to put you to a video of me doing the owl-eye brim on another hat to show you how to do the brim, and then we'll catch up and do the stitch. So I'll see you in a little bit. So I'm going to start by doing a chain cast on. It's a crochet chain cast on. I'm going to do it without a crochet hook. So what I do, I just take it, make a loop, just like that, and then put the working yarn through it and have a slip knot, and then I just place that on the first peg. And then I take my loom hook, put it under the loop, and pull the working yarn through to get a loop. And then I tighten it by pulling on the working yarn here in the back and make sure that this stitch is tight. And then I just take that loop, put it behind the next peg, holding on to it, and pull the working yarn through it. And that's all there is to the cast on. Put the loop behind, working yarn through, tighten it up, behind, working yarn through, tighten it up. And at any time, if you want this loop to be smaller, you just pull on it. So working yarn behind and tightening it up. I mean the loop behind and tightening it up. And that's all there is to it. And we just do that all the way around the loop. So I'm just going to put you on pause because it'd be boring watching me do it all the way around the loom. And we will catch up when I'm close to the other side. Okay, so here I am almost at the end. So I take the working or the loop, put it behind the peg, tighten it up, and then here's the one we started at. And so you just take the loop and let it fall over there, and just take the loom hook and knit it over, and now it's all secured and you're ready to go. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do now is finish the cast on. So I'm going to do a row of owl eye, and so I just do a U-wrap over peg 1, come over, and then I do a wrap over peg 1 and 2 and just knit it over and knit it over. Whatever peg you're on, peg 1, you go over peg 1 and 2 and knit it over. I have lots of videos of owl eye on my channel, so you can go watch those if you'd like to see more of a demonstration of it. And then just around and knit it over. On peg 1 over peg 1 and 2, knit it over. And we just do owl eye all the way around. Okay, so I will meet you back up at the beginning peg again. Okay, so I've done my row of owl eye all the way around the loom, and now I'm going to do one row of purl, and it'll be the only purl in the whole hat. And I just want to do it here at the beginning of the brim to make sure that the edge stays nice and straight. So how you purl is you put the working yarn into the loop. There we go. And then pull up the working yarn, take the loop off, and let the loop fall to the front. So take the hook, put it in the loop, pull up the working yarn, and you pull up the whole loop and put the new loop on. Under, pick up the working yarn, put it on the peg, and tighten it up. And there's lots and lots of videos on YouTube if you haven't purled before. So we just do one row of purl. So I will meet you up when we get back to the starter peg again. Okay, so I've done my row of purl, and now I'm just going to do owl eye, and our brim is going to be owl eye stitch. So how we start that, there's our peg 1. We always come over and do a U-wrap on peg 1, and now we can go and do a second wrap over peg 1 and one over peg 2. And wherever we are, we're on peg 1, so we wrap 1 and 2, and we just keep going like that. And you can make your brim however long you like it. You could make just a 1-inch brim if you like thin brims. I'm going to do about 1.5 inches. If you like a really long brim, you can do one that's 2 inches long. So I'm just going to keep working in owl eye till I get the brim the length that I want it, and then we can catch up. Okay, so we'll see you in a few. Okay, so now that you've done the brim, and so you're down here wherever the length of your brim is, and you just go right into the Milesian stitch at that point. So here you'll be at the last peg because you've done your brim and you're ready to start the Milesian stitch. So you put the first 2 pegs together, right? And what we do is we do a U-wrap, okay? Then we come back around, go over both pegs, because we're doing owl eye stitch actually as the start of this. And then you do the second wrap on the owl eye, going behind and then in front and knitting it off. Then with the same 2 pegs, you go in between them, around in front of the number 1 peg, back, oops, okay, you come in between them, round in front and behind, in the front again, and then behind. And then you just knit it off. Okay, so we're going to come in closer here. So here's the 2 pegs that are going to go together. You go in a U-wrap over the first peg, from behind, go in front of that peg again and go over the first and the second peg, keeping it loose. Knit them both off. Put a second knit on this one from going behind and in front. Knit it off. Now take the working yarn, and you're going to do a type of figure 8. It's one of the figure 8s. The figure 8s are all quite different. There's all these variations, and they're really not the same stitch, but because they go around in an 8, they call it the figure 8. But anyway, here you are from behind. You go in between the 2 pegs that you just wrapped, go over number 1 peg, come back in the middle, go over the front of number 2 peg, working yarns behind, and just knit them off. And that's all there is to the stitch. And if we look at what's going on here, you can see that it's lower here, and then there's 2 stitches there. It's lower here. This shows you the 2 stitches that were together. So when you come around the next time, you'll be knitting the 2 here that weren't connected, that have this dip. And then here's where this dip is. You'll be working with these 2. You're alternating as you go around. If you don't alternate, you get a different stitch. I have Milesian Stitch non-alternating on my channel already, done in a flat panel, and you'll see it's a really, really lacy stitch. It's not this stitch, but you'll just get something very different. Okay, so when we're going to do these next 2 pegs, here's our working yarn here. You can see that they weren't together last time, so that's the way you can double check to make sure you haven't screwed up somewhere. Okay, so you wrap over number 1 peg, and then basically what you're doing is an E-wrap, because you're going behind and going in front, but you're E-wrapping the opposite direction we were going. So if you need a way to think about it. But anyway, we did the U-wrap, and we're going to come around and go over the peg again, and we'll go over both of them there and knit it off, and then come around and go over the second peg and knit it off. And then we come in between them, in front of this peg, in between again, in front of the number 2 peg, and just knit them off. Okay, you can slow down the video if you need to. There's a button to slow it down, the lower left corner on the computer, and there'll be, depending on what app you have or how you're watching this, there'll be a way of slowing down the video, and that can make it easier if you're really watching how something's done. Okay, so here's the 2 pegs I'm working together. Go over the first peg, knit it off, from behind, go over 1 and 2, nice and loose, knit it off, from behind, go over the second peg in front, knit it off. Then we're going to come between, in front of number 1 peg, between, in front of number 2 peg, and knit it off. Okay, so that's all there is to it. So I'm just going to work the rest of the way around, and I'll meet you back up here when we get to the number 1 peg. So okay, I'm here and I'm near the end, and because my loom is uneven pegs, this one and this one go together. These were the first two that went together when we started. Now it'll be these two and then these two. So I'm just going to wrap these two. And there. So I've completed another round. And you going. There, my camera bleaked out for a minute. You just keep going till you get this hat as long as you'd like it. A lot of people make their slouchy hats to be about 10 inches. So this one is getting quite close to that. So we just keep going until we get it long enough. And then as soon as we do that, we're going to start doing the bind off. And we're going to do a kind of bind off that reduces the bulk. So we're going to reduce it. And we're going to do an easy reduction. So as soon as you're done, do a row of E-wrap. And of course, E-wrap is just E-wrap. I do 3 at a time usually, sometimes just 1. I never wrap the whole loom because that's how you get laddering and you can't control your tension. You create a tension problem when you go all the way around usually. So we just E-wrap all the way around and then we're ready to start doing the bind off process. So I'll see you when you've got as long as you want to be and you've done your row of E-wrap, and we will bind off. Okay, so we're going to do a reduced brim on the hat. And so the first thing we do, and I've already done this, of course, is done the 1 row of E-wrap. So you can do this not just with this hat, but with any hat that you have that you want to do a reduced brim so that it's not bulky, so it lays flatter, and it works especially nice on slouch hats. So whenever you do that, always do a row of E-wrap just before you start, no matter what stitch you are doing. And the reason for that is E-wrap is nice and loose, so it makes it easier to move stitches over. Okay, so that's the reason for that. So you do the row of E-wrap, and then we're going to start moving stitches to reduce. And it's a very easy reduction to get a flatter brim. We're going to count every 4 pegs. 1, 2, 3, 4. And on the 4th peg, we're just going to take it off the loom and then move it over to the peg before. So now you have 2 stitches on the loom. And number 4 is blank. And then you go 1, 2, 3, 4 again. You take the loom off, or the stitch off, and put it on the peg before. So now if we go from the beginning, we got 1, 2 pieces on here and a blank peg, 1, 2 pieces on here and a blank peg. And you're going to do that all the way around the loom. Every 4th, you're going to be moving over to the 3rd. When you get to the end, if it's not equally divisible, you'll have some extra loops with thread on, yarn on, that you can't move over, and that's okay. Leave them on. It's better to leave them on than to reduce too much. So I'll meet you back when we get all the way and that we reduced by moving every 4th peg onto the 3rd. So we'll see you in a few. Okay, so I've gone all the way around now and I've moved them all over, and mine did turn out fairly even. I have just 3 here instead of 2. So that's all because it's not evenly divisible. Okay, so now what we're going to do is do another round of E-wrap, and how you do that is you E-wrap all the pegs that have yarn on them, knit them over, and with this one we take both loops over, then go behind any empty pegs and E-wrap the pegs that have yarn on them, taking the two off, skipping by going behind the empty peg and then just E-wrapping. Okay, so you just do that all the way around the loom, and I will see you back at the beginning. Okay, so I've E-wrapped around the loom, and now we're going to do our next reduction. So we have the 3 pieces of yarn that are on the 3 pegs, and then on either side pegs with no yarn. So we're always going to be working with the ones that have yarn on them, and you're going to go 1, 2, 3, and you're going to take the yarn from number 2 now and move it over to number 1. And then on the next 3 peg grouping, you're going to do the same thing. Now on the first one I had 4 yarns, so here I'm going to just ignore the extra yarn here, and on 2 I'm just going to move it over to 1 like that. Okay, so you just go all the way around, taking the yarn from number 2 and putting it on number 1. It's a little awkward for me. And I'll meet you up when we have that all done. Okay, now that you've done that, you have yarn on every second peg. So now we just E-wrap around, doing the same thing, going behind the pegs with no yarn and E-wrapping the pegs with yarn. Taking both loops over, going behind the ones with no yarn, and just E-wrapping. So I'll see you when you have that done. Okay, so you finished, and then all we're going to do now is take this yarn and put it around the loom, and then another half. We just want to make sure we have it long enough, and cut it, because we're all reduced, and now we're just going to take it off the loom. Whoops. That off there. So you just take a needle. You can use your loom hook also if you want. You don't have to have a needle. And I'm just going to thread the needle with the yarn. There, got it this time. There we go. And then all you're going to do is go around the loom and just scoop up that yarn and get it inside this. So we go up and we just scoop up that loop. Okay, so I will just meet you up when we've scooped up all the loops. Okay, and then just be sure you've picked up every single loop, and then go back into the first loop that you started with. Then you can just take your needle off. At this point I'm just going to cut this a little bit smaller so it's easier to work with, and then take my loom hook, and I'm just going to start popping all these off the loom. You can even do it with your fingers. There. And it's off the loom. And then at this point, all we're going to be doing is drawing in the hat. So just draw it in a little ways, and then you're going to take the yarn and put it to the inside of the hat, although the inside of this hat looks really good, too. Just as good as the outside. Okay. And then you're just going to pull it closed until you get it all the way closed. Nice and tight. Now what I do is I hold it tight, and I usually go in and check and make sure that I've drawn it up evenly, and you can see that. So just a nice flattened brim. But now we can put the needle back on, cut this shorter again. Just save enough to sew it up and weave it in. And thread your needle. Okay, now I want to make sure that this is nice and tight so that we don't end up with a hole anywhere. And then I'm just going to put this through a couple of the yarns and make a knot. And I got that tail stuck in there. There we go. Just make a nice tight knot to hold it closed. And then you can see where the center was right there. And then I'm just going to sew around it. Now, if you were sure this was always going to be the inside of the hat, you could even just sew it across. But I'm going to sew around to keep it neat, for the reason that I might be using this side too. This hat is very nicely reversible, but it gives you that option. And I'm just going to sew around. And every once in a while, I'm just going to put a little knot on it. There, get that working iron out of there and sewing around here. And then I'm just going to do another knot. I just wouldn't want it to ever come undone. And when you're sure you have the hat all very securely sewn, you just do another little knot and you are done. There we go. And then you can weave in the end of the yarn. I'm not going to bother doing that now, just to keep it there. Turn the hat to the other side, and there you go. You have a nice flat brim. See? Just flattens it out. It has a really nice little shape to it. If you laid it down like this, you can just see how nice and flat it is. Just an easy way to reduce your brim. And it's really great on slouchy hats. Okay, so there you go. I hope you enjoyed the video. And until next time, we'll see you.